All right, welcome, friends. It is week 2, day 5. So we are cruising along. We're going to continue with our back end, continue looking through this. We're going to finish up our CRUD controllers. And so our creating, reading, updating, deleting, we're going to really walk through those today. I want to make sure that we have time to understand and kind of go through line by line. So that might be what we just end up doing today, because we are going to do a pretty good recap of this. If we have time, we're going to look at mongoose validations. They're very simple, so it's not like they're a challenging thing. So I don't anticipate us having an issue getting there, but I just want to make sure that we know everything before we get started there. A little bit of housekeeping. Again, discussion questions due 12/6, and your core assignment for this week, you only have one. It's your jokes API. And so everything we do today should get you to a place where you can do jokes API and it be a-okay. You should have all the material you need for that. But yeah, so you should be good to go after that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a recap or kind of talk through this, not a little bit. I want to talk through this to make sure that we have a good understanding of our backend, how it's all working, what's going on, and kind of, again, walk through the flow of what we're doing. So yesterday, what we did is we modularized our backend. We broke it out into smaller pieces, right? Just as a recap, we've got, this says lecture 1 because I just wanted to build off the code, but it's still the same project. But we have a project. In this case, it's called lecture 1. And it's going to have 2 folders in it. One's going to be client. That's our front end. That we're not touching that for right now. We haven't connected those two. I think we're going to do that tomorrow and or Tuesday. Where we can connect the two and actually start interacting with them. But this is just our Vite client. This is just our Vite project. The second one is we created this. That one's created for us by Vite. The second one we had to create was our server. So we created this folder called server. We did a few things just right off the jump. We did npm init -y, which gives us this package JSON. So again, this file just to remind us of what do we need. What are our dependencies? What kind of libraries or tools do we need to have for this to run? And then once this is created, we added some things. We added Express and we added Mongoose. So that way we could use both of those to actually build our application. We added this server.js file. This file has a couple things that we've seen a few times and a couple new things. This is bringing in the actual Express application. Again, the backend, if you want to import something, we call that require versus import. We're bringing that in, we're instantiating it. We defined a port. This doesn't have to happen. You could have just not had this and put 8,000 here. That would have worked just fine. But that should be, nothing new for us. We have our app.listen, which we've done before. Again, this has to be at the end. This is what actually activates our server. And then here, this app.use express.json and express URL encoded extended true. This allows us to send post requests. So that's something that we need to have as kind of some middleware. The 2 new things that we did was, and we'll kind of talk about this one first and then go to the next one, is we created this or added in this line of require, and it's this config file. So if we're to follow the pathway, we're looking in this config folder, which is a new folder that we created. And within that config folder, we have a file called mongoose.config. We have 4 new folders: config, controllers, models, and routes. And config, what this does is this mongoose.config.js is what is actually connecting us or connecting this application to our database. So that's what this file is doing. Now, this is all on the platform to where you can kind of copy and paste. But there is one portion that we have to make sure that we change, and that is this guy right here. This is the name of our database, right? And so what it's going to do is it's going to look at our MongoDB database. Mongoose in itself it's a library that we're using. And it's going to say, is there a database called MongoDB with this exact spelling, with capitalization and lowercase? If it finds it, then it's going to connect to that database, and then we can make some queries on it. But if it doesn't find it, it's actually going to create a new database for us. So if we go look into Mongo, we will see a new database once we start manipulating and working with it. That's really the main thing we have to change. That's the main thing you're going to have to do. It just gives us a promise. So if everything works great, then it says, cool, establish a connection to the database. But if there's an error, it will say something went wrong and it will give us this error. In order for us to use mongoose.connect, connect is just a method within the mongoose library. In order for us to do that, again, we have to bring that in. If I were to call this unicorn here, this would be unicorn.connect, right? We want to keep it mongoose because that makes sense, but this is just a variable. And we're just saying we want to refer to this library as whatever this variable is. And then wherever we call that, again, if I were to call this mon, this could just say mon.connect. That'd be a-okay. But let's stick with mongoose so we don't get confused. And whenever I'm reading your code, I can understand it. And so by us, with our server.js requiring that, we're allowing and saying, cool, this line right here, line 5, well, it creates our connection to our database. So as JavaScript goes and reads this top to bottom, it sees this, it goes into our config file, runs that, makes the connection, and either gives us back, hey, I'm connected to the database, or there was an error. And again, we don't have to set a variable equal to require in the same way we do here, because we're not trying to instantiate and or use that in other places. We just need a one-time run and then we're good to go. So we can just do that here. Now, once we've done that, we have some different things we can do. And before I get here, we'll kind of walk through that. Within our database, we've got these ideas of models. And this is a schema. This is a blueprint of what our data should look like. Yesterday, we created a movie schema, a movie blueprint. So anytime we save a movie, these are the attributes that it should have. Again, in order for us to use this, we need to, for us to use Mongoose, like mongoose.schema or mongoose.model, we need to make sure we require Mongoose. We bring that in, import it. Then we're just creating a movie schema. If we have users or unicorn schema, again, this can be called whatever you want it to be called. We should stick with a description, a movie, a user, whatever, and then schema because it makes more sense. This is just a variable. We can name this unicorn if we wanted. That's fine. We would just have to refer to that here. But what it's doing is we're creating a new Mongoose schema. And so what this is doing is this is defining the blueprint within our Mongoose database of what our data should have. This is what we call a constructor. And so if you remember anything back in Python or especially Java and you have this constructor, that's what this is doing. This is running this schema is running immediately, just like we had a constructor in either Java or Python if you took either of those. This is what creates it, right? A constructor just creates it if you didn't take either of those classes. We have a couple different attributes and we have different types. We have our title, year, rating, and Oscar. And then all we have to do, this is a key value pair. So noticing that this is an object. And we put the key, so whatever the attribute name is. And then within this, we can have some more information and we're going to look at this today. But for right now, all we're doing is specifying the type of information that we're saving. So in this case, it is a string, a number, Boolean. Remembering that when we have different types, whether it's a number or a string, that is a specific type of class. Meaning that when we want to do things or manipulate some data, we might have access to different things. So a number, I can do arithmetic, whereas a string, I can concatenate or do certain things, right? So it is important that we have the right type of class. And then the last thing is we have this timestamps is true. This gives us our created at and our updated at. We don't have to do anything with updated at. We don't have to update that time. It'll automatically take care of that for us. That's just something that MongoDB does natively. Then at the end, there's two things we do. We can either say module exports equals mongoose model and just kind of get rid of this whole variable thing. Or we can create this variable, which I think is great and fine to refer to as. And we're just saying movie. Again, this could be unicorn. And we're saying that is equal to this model. And this is actually creating that model. What it's going to do is it's going to create the model in this name. And then we're passing the value or the constructor, right, to actually create that, right? So this is the constructor. It's not initially running until we pass it in here. And at the end, we are exporting it. Can anybody remember why do we export this? What do we need this module exports for?
Does another file use it, like the controller?
Yeah, exactly, Brittany, and I see Johnny put that in there as well. Yeah, exactly. We want this, what this is doing, this module.exports is saying, hey, I want this to be available somewhere else within my code. So just like you said, Brittany, we'll go to our model, or sorry, our controller. And up here, we're saying, hey, we want to be able to use that, right? We want to be able to use this model to do specific things: query, get information, delete, update, read it. And so what we do is we say const movie equals require. So we're importing that model right here. And then here's our functionality. Now, I told you that there's two ways we could do this. We could say module.exports because there's another place that we're going to need access to it. Module.exports and then give it an entire object like we have here. Or what you could do, and this is what is on the platform, is you could do something like this, where we've got module.exports and then find one single user, right? Module.exports, create new user. You could do that for each one of them, or if you just want to say module. For me, I'm like, this is a lot of typing, like of the same repetitive nature. So I like to do it in one object. But if that's not something that kind of makes sense to you, you're welcome to do it the other way. And so all we're doing here is we are creating our functionality, right? And so if I want to get all movies, in the same way that back in my server file, we had, our app.get, we had our route, and then, well, what do we want it to do? We had our request and our response, and we did some sort of functionality. We're breaking that into two pieces. We have our route portion, which is our app.get, and then the route. And then our second portion is our controller, right? It's the functionality. And so we're breaking those apart. This is what we're going to be building on and focusing on today, where we're getting all movies or where we're kind of building stuff like that. We're going to do our create, read, update, and delete, find one by ID, stuff like that today. Look at all of the Mongoose commands. But just to kind of wrap up our recap, these are all called within this routes file. Now, what this routes file is it's a file that basically when if I go to my server.js, when a route is within our server and they're given, localhost 8000/API/movie, right? And it's a GET request. What it does is here in the server file, we're saying, hey, we want you to have access, and we're passing into our routes, our application, which is our Express application, so I can use my .get, .post, .put, .delete. And so what that allows me to do is here, when a route, it comes here, if somebody makes a request, they come here first and they say, okay, I have a GET request to /API/movies. And we go, okay, great. We have that route. What do you want me to do with it? It says, cool. I want you to go into my movie controller because remember we did our module.exports. I want you to grab all that. Cool. Now I have access to everything. I want you to go into that and I want you to run the get all movies function. So it goes, okay, great. It goes into there, runs this, and gives a response. Whatever it says to do after that, it gives that response there. These routes, we're going to do a couple different things with it. We're going to have more get and post. And just as a reminder, you can have the route be the exact same if the HTTP method is different. So if I have an app.get and an app.post and they're both /API/movies, that's okay because our method that we're using, a get or a post request, that differentiates for us. It's smart enough to know, no, this is a post request, so I want to go here and do create movie compared to here and do get all movies. Cool. Great. Johnny, I see Johnny has something that says, I'll discover a third way that seems somewhere between both, where you have your functions listed out as const variables, then have your module exports of a clean list. Yep, that's another way to do it. Absolutely. As a third way to kind of export that as well. Okay. Are there any questions? That's my recap of what we did. I know yesterday was a lot, so I wanted to make sure that we are good to go before we move forward. But are there any questions on this? Just put a 1 in the chat if this is all perfect information and we know it, or put a 0 if we don't. Cool. Okay, great. Well, what we want to do now is let's go through and build out our actual CRUD functionality, because right now all we have, if I come here, let me get rid of this. In my controllers, I just have this get all movies, but all it's doing is giving me this response, and that doesn't really make sense, right? That's not what we're doing. That's not really the point of this. So let's go ahead. And we have a couple different things. We already have the code here. And let's walk through this. Cool. Now, what this is doing is this get all movies is my function name, right? This is what I can refer to whenever I'm actually calling this within my route. Now, we remember that when we are making a request to a route, we have two things, right? We have our request and our response, right? So the request that we take in, that's really going to come in handy when we're dealing with our creation, when we're dealing with post requests, or we're starting to deal with like queries, oh my gosh, it's slipping me, request parameters. And then we have our response, right? So what do we have back? Once we make that request, once we fulfill it, what do we want to respond with? So right here, we have got this movie. And again, this movie refers to our movie model. And now within Mongoose, because this is all Mongoose, we don't have to use the native, MongoDB scripting. We can use Mongoose. This functionality it's got quite a bit of queries that we can use. And let's just look at them because I'm going to bring them in, and there's some differences between. So let me pull up chat. I'll make sure you guys have this. Now here you can see that Mongoose models provide several static helper functions for CRUD operations. That's exactly what we're doing, right? These are helper functions. These are things that instead of me having to write out the MongoDB query for finding all or finding one by an ID, it's what we call a helper function, meaning it's already done this for us. I just now have to say it as find, or, find one by ID and update, things like that. And it will do all that kind of heavy work for me. It says that it can be executed in one of two ways. You can either pass in a callback function. Mongoose will execute asynchronously and pass the request to the fallback, or query also has a .then and thus can be used as a promise. So this is how we do it, is we use it as a promise, right? Because we have our then and our catch here. Great. So when we are wanting, and I just kind of want to go through each one of these, when we're wanting to get all things, and if we see this on the platform as well, we can find all users. This .find is going to be the helper function that we use from Mongoose that gets us all of our information. And I think it's important for us to know how documentation is read. And when we're using tools like libraries, we want to understand what is it doing, what is it giving us back. So just thought we'd read through some of the documentation. Great. So it says Mongoose casts. So when we run this .find, it casts the filter to match the model schema before the command is sent. Great. Now we're walking through this, and what it gets us is it returns this query, right? And so if I were to look at this, let's just see what it does here. We run this .find, and because we're doing this promise, right? What it does is it gives us back this list, or this array, of all of my movies, right? Now we call this all movies. This is what we are calling it. This is what we are naming the value that it's giving us back. So if it works and everything is A-okay, then we have all movies, and we can console log it, and then we respond with all movies. So our actual response is all movies. Now, if there's an error, and this is very common, like you're not really going to change your .catches. So you can really kind of think about copy and pasting from a reality standpoint. We have our .catch where we're saying, okay, there was an error. I want to take that. I'm going to name it ERR for error. Let's console log it. Let's respond, and we're going to give our status a 400. And then we are going to say our JSON and then actually give the error. This status, there's a bunch of different statuses. There's 200 if it's okay, 400 if there's an error, 404 if it can't be found. So there's different statuses that we'll kind of talk through later on. So don't really worry about this portion right here. You could just say res.json ERR, and that is going to respond or give a response of the JSON and the actual error itself. So again, we run this helper function that gives us a promise. When we run find, that gives us a list of everything that matches or everything within that model itself. So in this case, all movies. If that's good, then we call it all movies. That's what we decide to name it. This could be unicorn if we wanted, just anywhere else we would refer to it as unicorn. So I just want to make that abundantly clear. Then if there's an error, we catch it. Now, if I run this, let's open up Postman. So let's first off get my terminal up and running. There's going to be an error. I can already tell. Oops, sorry. Give me a second. I think I have to comment these out because it's going to say I don't have that. Okay. So let's first get my terminal, new terminal, cd into my server. Let's say node mon server.js. And we see that we have listening on port 8000. That's good. That means our server.js file was read correctly, and we have established a connection to the database. So that means that our config file was read correctly, right? And that promise of establish a connection to the database, it's a .then, so everything is A-okay. So let's use our handy dandy Postman to actually make a request and see what we have access to that. Cool. So we've got, bring this over. We have this HTTP localhost 8000 API/movies, right? Now, if I say send, it gives me back this empty array, which is good. That's fine. Our status is 200, which means it's A-okay. That was read correctly. We just don't have any movies in my database for it to return. But it returned well, right? It returned everything we have. We just don't have anything in there. Let's go see if, because we made the request, it was also created. My database was actually created. Let's go check. Let's connect. Not yet. Not yet. We haven't created anything, so it still is not showing up. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, we've seen this before, right? We've done a couple different things with our creation. But let's go first to our method. Now, I like to kind of build out everything. Garrett and I were talking about this yesterday. I like to build out my model first. I like to build out, obviously, my config file really doesn't change except the database name. And really, the bulk of what you're going to be doing from the backend side is this controller file. Like once you get this done, your backend is basically done. You just have to connect the routes to it. So let's go ahead and create our movie. Now, I like to kind of name my stuff. So in this, except let's do this. That way I know, like, okay, what method am I dealing with? What am I doing? So here I have get all movies. This one is create, but same sort of idea. We have the method name, so the function name. In this case, we're calling it create movie, which makes sense. That's exactly what we're doing. That takes in a request and response. Now, if you remember back, I can't remember, a couple of weeks ago, we made requests, and we showed that when we made that request, there was a whole bunch of information, a huge object that we had. And one of the materials that we had, or one of the things we had access to, was the rec.body or request.body, right? And that was a key that basically had everything that came from our form. So in the same way, we do our move.create. .create is our helper function. But in order for me to create something, I need to give it some information, right? I need to give it whatever's coming. Typically, this is going to be coming from your form. You're not really going to be like hard coding it like we're about to do, but it's going to be coming from your form, right? But when I make that request, there's going to be a body portion. Again, when we're making the request from our form, we have that body key. And we're saying, hey, I want to give you this information to make this, in this case, movie. Then if everything goes well, it's going to give us back our new movie that was just created. Here we're just console logging it, and then we are responding with that new movie. So, okay, great. Maybe I want to navigate to the page once I create it. I want them to give me that new movie back, and I want to navigate to that dashboard page with that new movie, something like that, right? And then same thing, if we have a catch, which means that there's an error, we want to take in the error, we'll console log it, and then we will give a response like, hey, there's an error. So let's go try this. We're going to come here. We have this post request of API/movies. Does anybody remember how we make a post request within Postman? What do we got to do?
I think you need to go to body and then
Yeah.
raw and JSON.
Body, raw, JSON. Yep, that's exactly true. So we have our body. We make sure that it's raw, and then we change it to JSON. By default, it's typically not going to be JSON, so that's really going to be the big one that you change. And then we pass in our information. Now, one thing to note, especially when we're dealing with this and when we're dealing with MongoDB, is we don't need to pass in this ID because that's going to be auto-generated for us. So we don't need that. Now, one thing that when you're kind of testing your backend, and this is what I would absolutely suggest you to do, is get your backend up and running and then worry about your front end. Make sure the functionality works, and then your front end you can kind of handle. But I like to go to my model and just kind of go through and make sure that everything is spelled correctly, named correctly, especially when I'm testing it. So I've got my title. Here I've got a title. Yep. I've got a year. Let's just delete this. So I've got my title, my year. Great. What else do I need? I need a rating. So let's go ahead and add that in. So I say rating. And we'll say that this is out of 10 and it's my favorite movie. So I'm going to do that. And then it says Oscar nomination. So let's go ahead and build that. Oscar nomination. And I don't think it was, which is honestly a tragedy. Cool. So now what should happen is if I run this request, if I click send, what it's going to do is it's going to go to my routes page and it's going to say, hey, I have a post request at API/movies. It says, great, we have that. Okay, go to your movie controller and run create movie. And it's going to say, okay, it's going to run here. It's going to run create movie. It's going to say, hey, I have this rec.body, which is just what we wrote. And then if everything's good to go, we're going to respond with a new movie. And if I look in my actual console, I'll see that we console logged it. And if not, there is an error. We save this, make sure we're good to go, establish a connection, and then we come and we send. And we get a bad request. We get a bad request. Let's figure out, what did we do wrong? So we have our localhost 8000 /API/movies. So first off, what I would do if I entered this, right? If I had this error, I'm going to first off go to /API/movies. Okay, that's good to go. Then we're saying movie.controller, create movie. Let's go in here and let's go to my console. So this is an error. This is a Mongo server error. It says DB already exists with a different case. Already have movie DB trying to create movie DB. So this
The
might,
case sensitivity. Wow.
yeah, they might have updated this because it used to not, you could have one and the other.
Right.
So let's go. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to create, remember, like I said, if we're creating, then that's when it actually goes and creates this, right? And once we created one time, then it's good to go. And so it's saying, hey, you have this DB and you're trying to create this, but it looks like it already exists, but a different case already have. So let's just go, there's two things we could do. We could either go in here and change this to DB and then it be the same one, but let's do something like I'm gonna say, just for the sake, new movie DB. Or let's say no member DB. No movie DB for November. That's what this class is. Okay. So now I've established a connection to the database. Let's go try running it again. Let's see. Okay. So now, because that error, and this is why console logging your errors really helps. So if we just had responded, then we had the kind of our code there. But by console logging the error, we're able to see like, oh, it's our DB thing. But now that that's the case, now that we switched it and it isn't just case sensitive on one letter, it looks like we were able to create our database. So now, oh, interesting. When I saved, oh, okay. So this is really interesting. Whenever I said new movie DB and I pressed save, because I have NodeMon, it went and reran everything. Then when I did it again and changed it, and it reran, which is interesting because this normally shouldn't have created. Fascinating. Okay, regardless, we have this new movie DB. And within that, we can go to our movies. And now I can see.
Sorry, what happened there? The new movie, when you
New
say
movie, yeah, because I have NodeMon on, it automatically reran and resubmitted all the things.
Mhm.
And then I changed it. And then if I didn't have NodeMon on, it wouldn't have done that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But now, because we're on Nove Movie DB, and that's what we actually used, because you can see like here, it doesn't have anything in there because we didn't run it while it was on there. It just says created. So I'll actually just delete this. Okay. So now that we have this, we actually have one movie, right? Where we have, and you can see the information that was created for us. It created this underscore ID. It did this, created at and updated at, and then it gave us the version here. So we have a rating is 10, year, Walter Mitty, an Oscar nomination, false. Okay, let's go ahead and create one more movie. Somebody want to put their favorite movie or a good movie in the chat? Lord of the Rings. All right, Brittany, what year did that come out? Oh, I like Barbie. Let's do that. That'd be funny. My wife loved that movie. I thought it was meh, but my wife loved it. But I like it because it is 2023. What would you guys rate Barbie? Scale of 1 to 10. 8. All right. I don't think it had an Oscar, correct? So we'll do this. Okay. So now I have this. I'll send it. Great. It gives me back my same one, right? If I come here, I might need to refresh. And I go to movies. Let's see, is there a refresh up here? Get us back at 200. Okay. So everything should be A-okay. I wonder if I run this request, maybe just this is slow and might be batched to where it's not an instantaneous request. So let's actually check, right? We haven't, this gave us a list of everything that's in our actual database, which we didn't have anything. So now let's go back to our Git and see, is it in there? It is, right? So we're good to go. It just looks like this tool, I love it, is a little bit slow. Okay. But regardless, by using Postman, we're able to see that we now have 2 movies here. We have Barbie with this ID, and we've got Walter Mitty. Let's do one more movie. Does anybody have another movie that we can do? Omar said Spider-Man 2. Omar, when was Spider-Man 2? When did that come out? 2004. What would you rate Spider-Man 2? 10. All right. Did it win an Oscar? I don't think it did. That would be my guess. Also, can we just talk about some of the best movies don't win Oscars and some of the worst movies do? So that's my hot take. Anyway, we've got this. Let's send it. Cool. We get this 200. Okay, we're good to go. If I go to my Git and I run this again, make a new request, I now have Walter Mitty. Oof, sorry, my mouse is acting very funny. I have Walter Mitty, I have Barbie, and now I have Spider-Man. But they all have individual IDs. Great. Okie doke. Now, let's say that I wanted to just get one movie, right? And this is what we're going to do within our projects and within our belt exam specifically is I want to get one movie in the same way that when you're on Facebook and you are wanting to get your profile, it's not getting you everybody's profile, right? You're not sifting through that. It's just getting your specific profile. This is how it does it. So it has a database with your profile and all your information, and then it goes and it grabs, usually by an ID or some sort of unique identifier, goes and grabs it and then loads your information. So let's go build that out. Before we do that, let's look at what do we think. I'm trying to see. My mouse is very delayed for some reason. Okay. What do we think? If I go back. Okay. There's a couple different ones we can do. We can find one. That's great. We can find by ID. And we can, or we can do like find one and delete, replace, update. So we either can find by ID or we can find one. So let's click on it because I believe one of these became antiquated. So let's see, translate any schema data, our cast. No conditions is optional. If conditions is null, mongoose will send an empty find one, return an arbitrary document. If using ID, so if you're querying by ID, which is exactly what we're going to be doing, use find by ID instead. Cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and use find by ID. And let's walk through. Cool. So I just need to pass in that information. When we look, we just see find by ID. We're passing in the ID and then the information. Okay, great. So let's go build that out. And we can also see this on the platform as well. So find one. Now, if we're going to find one, or we're going to do find one by ID, we still need to pass in some information, right? So let's do that. Let's actually just go off this one because this is what's on the platform. And then we can, as we go, build this out. Cool. So I'm going to get out of my config because that's been fixed. I'm going to go to my controller. I'll make a comma because this is just one big object. So I'm going to say find one or get one. That's fine because we're doing a get request. That's fine. What I actually like to do personally, and this is totally up to you, is I like to do all my get requests together. And then I like to do all my creates and everything just because I know, okay, these are my gets, these are whatever. Totally up to you. Doesn't matter how you do it. But I like to do it. So we're going to get one movie. And we're going to say get one movie. This one uses find by ID because that's exactly what we wanted to use anyway. And let's walk through exactly kind of the difference in what it's doing. Is we're getting one movie. Now, the difference is when we were just getting movies or getting all movies, we didn't have to pass in anything, right? Because you're just going to make a query to the model. It's going to give me everything back. Now, if we want to get one movie, we have to give it additional information so that it knows which movie do we want to get. And again, by doing the ID or the unique identifier, that allows us to get one specific movie. Now, if you guys can recall, when we were dealing with routes, we had a way that we could put some dynamic information within my route. So that way it knew that whenever I called a route with some piece of information, that I could take that, dynamic piece of information, or in this case, the ID, I could call it and refer to it as this object here with a key of ID, and I would be able to retain and grab that information. The way we did that was through our request, not body, but our request dot params. Request dot params is an object of all the parameters. You can have, lots of them. And it's all separated. It's an object and it's a key value pair. So it's all separated by the keys. In this case, our key is ID because we named it ID right here. This is wildly, wildly, wildly important. Bring this down. You have to have this match your request params dot ID, because this is the key name that we are creating for our parameter object. And so if we're referring to the information, we have to call it the same thing. So don't call it like movie ID and then call it ID here. I see that a lot with students. Whatever you call it in your route has to be what it's referred to as your params, because your params object is going to call whatever this is. That's the key name. So that's what we're referring to. So we're saying, hey, I want you to find by ID. The ID is coming from your route, which is very common in the same way that the Coding Dojo, you can see this platform here has, these are just like IDs, just a unique identifier. It's a very, very common thing. And so we're grabbing that and we're saying, cool, once you get that, if that exists, I want to call it one movie. Let's console log it. And then I want you to respond, give me that movie. If there's an error, go ahead and give me that error. So we've saved. We're good to go. Let's go ahead and go to Postman. Let's grab one ID. So let's grab Barbie. Let's check my route. What route do I need to go to? I need to go to /API/movies/ID because it's RESTful routing, right? We're building on it. And then I need to pass in the ID. So if I go back here, Postman, I can duplicate a tab. Perfect. It's my GET request. And this one, I'm just going to say / and then I pass the ID. And it goes and it retrieves Barbie specifically. Goes and it retrieves Barbie. Are there any questions? I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on retrieving just one? Just put one in the chat if this is all making sense. Put a 0 if it does not. Just Brittany's crushing it. Anybody else?
Can you please go back to the controller?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fine, bye.
And one thing to note, because we're console logging, right? One movie within my console as well. This is the object that we're getting back. So all we're doing that's different is we're saying we're using the helper function of find by ID, but find by ID needs some information, needs the ID, right? And so we say rec.params ID. And then that is the parameter that we're getting from our route right here. If I were to call this unicorn, it'd be rec.params.unicorn, but it's not, it's ID. And then it gives me back, it says, okay, great, find one by ID is a helper function. It knows what it is doing. Then it gives me back the movie if it has it. And if it doesn't, it gives me an error. So if I were to go to Postman, maybe change this to a 2. Null, right? Should be giving me an error. Not sure why that. I think what it's doing is it's saying that doesn't exist there, that the query itself is okay, but that in itself does not exist. So you would probably want to say if null, some sort of issue. But you would rarely get, there's going to be ways that we pass in our ID with our route. So you're rarely ever going to get that issue unless somebody were to hard code that. To kind of build off of this, let's update kind of with the same sort of ideology, right? I need to still get some information, and maybe I want to update it. And let's change Barbie. Let's say we've had to change a heart, and Barbie went from an 8 to a 10 because the other two were 10. So let's make it a 10. So what I can do is I'm going to update, and I'm going to we'll say update movie. Cool. And that's going to take a request and a response, just like normal. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to say movie dot, and we can decide how we want to do this, right? We can do find one and update, or there's find by ID and update. Let's find that. So if I just go back, we have find by ID and remove, find by ID and update. So the parameters of what we need to do is to pass in the ID, the value of ID, right? And then we'll also pass some information. So these are all optional, but we need to pass in the ID because we're finding one by ID and updating. So that is called, let's see, find by ID and update. So let's go to my code and say find by ID and update. Perfect. Now that takes in some information. So our rec, dot params dot ID, right? In the same way, it also takes in some information where I need to give it the information or the values that I want it to update to. So for right now, let's go ahead and say we want, okay, sorry, got a little bit confused there. So we have our ID, and that's what we need, right? Then we also need to pass it in the new information. And there's some optional things, but you'll see this on the platform as well, where I can say new is true. And then I can say run validators true. We don't have any validations yet, but here we go. Oh, that just automatically fixed. So what find by ID and update is going to do is it takes in the ID that we want. It takes in the rec.body, so the new information that I want to update this with. What this new :true means is I want to return the new value, not the old one, but the new value I've changed it to. What run validators true, we don't have any validations yet, but what it is whenever we create validations, it doesn't look like we're going to get to it tonight. But when we they're super easy and we'll do it tomorrow. But when we create validations, we want to make sure that somebody can't create something with validations that passed it, and then they can go in and update it, and it no longer passes our validations, right? They can't create a password with 8 characters, go in and update their password and just put a period, right? That doesn't, we want to make sure we prevent that. So that's what this run validators is true. We don't need that yet. So we'll actually take that out. But those are both optional. But what this new is doing is it's, I guess we'll just keep it's not going to hurt anything. What this new true is it's going to return the new object. Then what it'll do is it'll return the updated movie, right? We'll console log it, return that, or if there's an error, then it will treat it like we treated all the other ones. Cool. So again, walking back through this, because we're doing find by ID and update, we are passing in the ID. We're passing in the body of the information we want to update it to. And then what these are doing, both optional, but it's saying, cool, I want to return the new values. And then if we had validators, we'll go ahead and run them. We don't have that yet, but we will tomorrow. Cool. So what I need to do now is go into my routes, make sure that I have my update that's got ID, making sure that these match. Oops, sorry. My mouse is acting so funny today. Rec.params.id, cool, that does match my routes. And then what I can do is, this is a put. So let's go ahead in here. Let's create that. We're making a put request. We have our body. We're going to go in. It's raw. Oops, not binary. Raw. Type is JSON. What I'm going to do is just come here. Sorry, my post. Just going to copy this. But we're saying that we wanted Barbie to, that's 2023. Rating is a 10 and Oscar nomination. Let's say true. Margot Robbie crushed it. Okay. Now, oops. What I need to do is I need to go to local host 8000 / API / movies / and now I need to go and get Barbie's actual ID and pass that in here. And when I press send, could not send request. Here, localhost 8000 HTTP. I'm missing an HTTP. Okay. Now if I send it, what is going on? So this is saying that it cannot connect. So that what that would tell me is that there's something wrong here, and there is. So let's see. NodeMon crashed. Unexpected end of input. Server controller. So in my controller. No.
Looks like an extra.
I'm missing a bracket. I think I'm missing a bracket. There we go. Now, sorry about that. We should be able to run this. Cool. So now we can see that at the same ID that we passed in, 631E, Barbie's got this new information. And what's kind of cool is it was updated, and this updated app was handled by our by Mongo. I didn't have to touch it. So now if I come back here and I refresh and I send, this is my get all, I still have it. Barbie's still there. Now these are different because I've updated it more recently, but we see that we have a rating and true. So we have now updated one of our values. Cool. Now the last one I want to do is, let's do Spider-Man 3 or Spider-Man 5. I don't know, 2014. Maybe it's like the worst movie we've ever seen. And let's create. Great. So we have this. I run it. Cool. So now I have a whole bunch. Now let's go ahead and delete this one. So let's do our delete, and that's how we'll finish class. In all of these, there's different ways to do it. So these are all here as well. So creating a new user, updating existing user, find one and update. There's a different way we can do it that way, where we pass in and saying, cool, find one and update. If we do find one and update, we have to pass in the information that's the unique identifier. And we're saying, hey, the one that has the key of underscore ID. So this is really important. If you do find one and update versus find by ID and update, and you're using this, the ID in Mongo has an underscore in front of it. So you have to make sure that you have that. This is the information you're trying to pass in. That is the unique identifier. Again, we're just doing rec.params.id. And we don't have to give the key, because you could do find one and update where the title was Walter Mitty, right? It has a little bit more flexibility, but we did find by ID. So we're kind of stuck with the ID. Still rec.body, you're still in your new true here. We just have to change this. But last one is we are deleting one. So let's go ahead and see how we can do this. Let's go back here. I like to, again, I've read a while ago that Mongoose suggested find by ID over, find one and delete. I don't see that anymore, but that's what I had read. So I like to do that, especially because we're doing an ID, and we did see in the documentation, it said if you're going to look by ID, just use by ID. So we're going to do it that way. Also because find one and delete is already on the platform. So showing you another way of how to do it. So we're going to do our deletion. So let's go to my controller. And I'm going to do a comma because this is all just one big object. I like to say delete. And I'm going to say delete movie, where we are, that's what it's called, rec.params, or sorry, rec and res. We are finding by ID and deleting in the same way. Because we're doing find by ID, I don't have to specify the key that we're trying to use for our search and for our filtration. It just knows it's an ID, so we just have to pass in the ID itself. Then we're saying, cool, delete movie, let's console log it, and then give me back my deleted movie. If not, there's an error. And it's gonna give me another error. Cool. Last thing we do is we make sure that we can to app.delete. Again, API movies ID. And you can see that these, although they all three are the same thing, because the HTTP method is different, it's a get, it's a put, and it's a delete, we're able to handle that seamlessly. It's A-okay. But now that we have this running, I can go to Postman. Let's get this Spider-Man 5. Let's say it was the worst movie we've ever seen. Let's do one more. It is a delete. All we have to do is say http://localhost 8000/API/movies/ID. And just to show before, if I run this, we get Spider-Man 5 and all the other ones. And then whenever I run this deletion, it gives me back the item that was deleted. And if I were to rerun this, excuse me, we no longer have Spider-Man 5. So we now have officially created, make this lower. We have created, we are able to read all or read one. We were able to update, and we're able to delete. This is full CRUD functionality. If I'm being super transparent, this is a help for the exam. This is what you're going to have to do for the exam. Like no matter what really the focus is or whatever the theme is, this is the code you're going to have to use regardless. Continue to create, read, update, delete. And you have to create one, or sorry, find one, right? So this is going to be pretty transparent, and like transitive property idea, you could use this quite a bit throughout. So we're going to keep seeing how we can kind of build this in, and then handling requests from the front end that then do this. Like we still have to put it all together, which I think we'll start tomorrow because we're going to do validations at the beginning. That's fairly simple. And then we will kind of have all that. We'll start that full stack application stuff because there's some different tools that we need to build in with that. Okay. Any questions on, I know today was kind of a lot. I didn't think it was going to be so much, but it was kind of a lot. But are there any questions on what we just talked about? How are we feeling about it? I'm done teaching. So is there anything you guys want to talk about? Need clarification on? Would love to, get more of an example.
Just curious, will this update the Atlas now? The
Yeah, let's go check.
MongoDB.
Yeah, let's go check. No, this honestly might be down. Let me go just get rid of that. Let me quit and then do, because it wasn't responsive to anything I was doing, so it makes me think that the GUI, or the graphical user interface, the little application itself, wasn't responding. Let's make a connection. So now if I look at this, I look at movies, yeah, I have all of this here. I have all of my movies here. And you can see that my Barbie is updated. Oops. And we see that my different time here. Because all of these have the same time because they haven't been updated, except this one we did update to make it a 10 out of 10. So Johnny asked a great question that maybe I might need a little bit more of a understanding from what the question is, but it says, I'm curious, how would you secure an API for your app? Or would that even be something that you would do? I assume these API calls are or would be public upon deployment. So the way we're going to do it, and I think you're kind of hitting, maybe I'm answering the question. If there's not, I can follow up. The way we're going to do it is they are not going to be putting in the ID for each thing. And so really what we're going to do is, let's say that there's a hyperlink or in this case, a link because it's going to be on our front end in our React. And that link is going to send us or send a request here, like maybe there's a button called delete that a function sends an Axios request to this server, passes along the ID. So it's not really going to be handling, like they're not going to see the ID anywhere. That's just what we're going to be on our backend. This is what we're going to be sending them to. So you said, I think I mean anyone can access the info in our DB as they have the URL for the API. So no, because this local, so right now this local host just lives on my computer. Normally what you would do is you would have this hosted somewhere where you would have a connection string, and then what you would typically do is not have your like config file, wouldn't have it just blunt here. You'd have something like a .env file or a file to show, like you would have a .env file, and what .env files will do is I could have, let's say like up here, I had a, not in my config. So maybe we'll just put it in our server just for an idea. I could have a .env. .env files, what they do is they allow you, because I get what you're getting at. If we have an API key, if we have something that is unique that we want to make sure that we protect, we can use a .env file, and we could say something like connection string. Let's say something like this, right? Now, we can then go into where we say connection string. You don't have to say let, it's not JavaScript, it's just an env file. And this is really common practice. So that way, this is across multiple languages, Java, Python, C#. .env is a very common thing. Where you have this connection string or maybe some sort of information like that you want to protect. What you would do is then instead, you would put it here, and then as part of your get ignore, you would have, and it would live somewhere within your code base, or like AWS has like a little secrets thing that you can put, so you can create these secrets. And so you'd have this .env file, and then where you would go is in here, instead of having this, you would just refer to that as, it depends on which language, but like os.getenv, and then you put the actual variable. And so it will go in, and what people would see would be, just for ease of use, we'll just say something like they would see connection string. That's what they would see. But you would use, depends again on the language, you might use like os.env or whatever to pull in connection string. But what it's really doing is it's going here, grabbing this information, injecting this here, so it works. And then if you're hosting it on, AWS, you would create that environment. It's called an environment variable. You'd create that environment variable on AWS. So again, that they can't see it. And if somebody were to look at your code, if it was on GitHub, if it's public, all they would see is connection string, but they wouldn't actually see the value. So I think that's what you're asking. Oh, that's weird. Is that what you're asking? Sorry. but yeah, you would have a .env file. If we were to go to I'll just give you this. Yeah, you can just look this up, but there's tons of different things to talk about .env file. Let me just do this one. I don't even know. Oh my gosh. Yeah, just Google .env files and then you can kind of walk through the different ways to do it. Somebody asked where you can find MERN lectures. They're all here on our class sheet. Cool. Any other questions? We'll go over tonight. I'll do that.
I have a question actually, but it's about validation. But I know it's for tomorrow. So we have validations in the front end and we have validations in the back end.
Yeah, we'll talk about validations tomorrow, but yeah, we'll have it in both. It just as a little, or I guess, are there any other questions real quick? And then I'll say something off recording. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.